Most industry analysts believe that we're moving into the next major phase of technology landscape. We had mainframes. Incidentally, this year NASA turned off their last mainframe, which I thought was pretty interesting. Then we had client-server, desktops, the whole internet thing came around, and now we have really mass adoption of smartphones. We don't need to tell you that this space is white hot. My mother has an iPhone. I get incoherent, auto-corrected text messages. But the main point here is not that mobile is here to stay, but how do you make appropriate use of this ever-changing landscape and make the most of it? An article on Forbes.com just last week, I think, provides pretty good framing for the topic today. Competitive advantage will not be gained by providing your customers a sharp mobile app, but by making sure that every decision maker in your organisation understands the needs and habits of mobile users. To provide us their expert perspectives on this, I'll introduce my fellow ThoughtWorkers, Jonny Schneider, this one here with the glasses. In Brisbane we did the intro and I didn't actually say who was who. So Jonny looks after digital strategy in the mobile space, and Stewart Gleadow, who heads up our mobile practice from a technology perspective. Please join me in welcoming them.
Thanks. Welcome to our talk, Mobile More Than Just an App. Mobile's hot right now. Everyone wants to talk about it. So we want to try and put it in perspective in what's happening in the mobile space, the uptake, how we can create better mobile experiences, and also building an app. We think mobile is a lot more than just building an app, but that is a key point in a mobile experience right now. There will be some statistics. There will be some trends. Bear with us, it's not going to be the whole talk. We're not just going to spit statistics at you. We really want to get onto the guts of actually how do we get started in this. And Jonny's going to kick us off.
Okay, thanks everybody for your time this morning. Here's what we're going to talk about. As Stu mentioned, we're going to race through these first two sections. It's stuff that you're all probably fairly familiar with. So let's get into that. We are using local research wherever we can. Sometimes we can't, so we use US numbers and their markets are similar, so that's okay. If we take a look at the last 100 years of technology change, we can see that things typically took a while. We've got examples here of electricity, automotive, and telephone, 50, 70, and 80 years respectively. More recently, with the internet and mobile phones, those have been a lot quicker and have reached high levels of usage very quickly. Those numbers were to 2005, so if we have a look at internet adoption to more recent numbers, this is 2011, and we can see that around about 80% of people are regularly using the internet today, and that's the same in Australia. So we've got a lot of people using the internet, but how are they accessing the internet? It's no surprise that desktop computing has been in decline for a while, and people are preferring laptop. What's interesting is that almost everybody has a mobile phone, nearly 90% of people owning some kind of mobile phone, and tablets are on the rise fairly sharply too. So in Australia we see there's more phones than people. It's because a lot of people have multiple devices. I've got a few, I'm sure everyone here has. About half of those devices are smartphones and 20% of people owning tablets, so the numbers are very similar. If we take a brief look at the history of mobile internet, back in the early days, the analog networks, we may have been using devices like this if we could afford them. And around about 1993, 2G networks rolled out in Australia, and with that we saw SMS. A little bit later, the first internet browser for mobile phones, about 97, but most phones didn't have them. You might remember this device, Nokia 5110. I'll bet you that you didn't use the browser. You probably played Snake though. Who played Snake? Okay, so a little bit later on, we see 3G networks, probably not quite on these devices yet though, and we started to see the Motorola Razr and things like the Palm Trio. So PDA devices now got internet browsing and people starting to use the internet a little bit more. First WebKit browser around about 2005. That just means the first kind of decent browser, the first phones that were able to render web pages in some kind of reasonable way. And I think everybody knows the rest of the story. We see iPhone 3 come out in 2007 and people basically went nuts for the internet. And a year later the App Store came to market and things got crazier. A little bit later, first Android device and the tablet, which is part of why we're all here today, to talk about how these technologies are affecting us. But so what, right? Because this is just new technology that people are using. We're much more interested in the effect that this has had, which in short means that we've changed the way that we behave. Don Norman is a thought leader in cognitive sciences, design and usability engineering, if you're not familiar with him. He's written some seminal books. The gist of what he's saying here, in essence, is that it's not the gadgets that change the world, but how we humans use them. So we think he's right on the money with that statement, and we see that play out in a few different ways. Let's take a look at an example that Stu's going to run us through.
Yeah, so we've had a look at a bunch of trends there, and obviously mobile is booming and we're all getting connected. But what we think is the most important thing is not so much the technology itself, but the actual behaviours and the social interaction that enables. So if I asked you what the most radical, innovative mobile device that's been released in the last few years was, you probably think of the iPhone first. It really brought mobile browsing to the masses and everyone started doing it. You might even think of the iPad, which created a market for a device we didn't even know we wanted, and then we all bought them anyway. But I'm going to put it out there that I think it's the Vodafone 150. So this device does voice and SMS. It also runs a thing called USSD, which is a kind of similar protocol to SMS. But the main thing is it retails outright for about $10 to $15. And that puts it within reach of a majority of the world that previously had no access to phones. And this is where we start to see behaviours changing, not just new technology, but actually the social interactions changing. So to put it in perspective, if we have a look at the population density of Africa, it's fairly spread out. There's quite a lot in North Africa. That pocket of West Africa around Nigeria is heavily populated. The electricity coverage kind of overlaps with that, but it's actually only about 4% of the population in Africa that has access to grid power. Now, if we overlay that with strong GSM network coverage, it's a huge amount greater. It still looks pretty sparse, but this is actually 98% of the population. I think this is phenomenal. 4% of the population has access to grid electricity, and nearly everyone has access to mobile coverage. And there's this whole new business booming of people that drive into villages with car batteries and charge you to recharge their mobile phones. And that's where these small phones that don't have a lot of, it's what we would call smartphone technology, are actually really changing the way that people behave. And they're not focused on the shiny new devices that we are here. And I think it seems like this is a bit detached from our experience. This is on the other side of the world. But we're going to be taking a lead from places like Africa in this because they're not focusing on the technology, they're focusing on the behaviour and actually meeting people's needs. So to give an example of that, what does that mean for information sharing? We're really seeing, not just in Africa, but globally, that people are going from having access to only their immediate surroundings and the information that they can gather right around them to being connected in a global network and having access to all information. So the example in the photo there is a system called Rapid FTR, which ThoughtWorks worked on, which is a system for reuniting lost children with their families. So the old system was taking photos of children, say they got separated from their families when there were masses of people leaving South Sudan a few years ago. The aid workers would take photos of the children, gather what information they can off a 2-year-old child, and you ask them who their parents are and they say mum and dad, and everyone says mum and dad, so that doesn't help. And people would actually come and look at these walls of paper information and try and find the children. So this system enables you not just to have access to just the wall in your local village, but to all of the children that have been found. And it really enables new interactions. And again, this sounds like an example from the other side of the world, but they're replacing a manual paper-based system with an electronic system. It has to deal with being offline, online, gathering the data while you're offline, syncing when you're back at the aid centre with a Wi-Fi connection. And it has to deal with security. Returning a child to the wrong parents is a hugely dangerous thing to do in that part of the world. So security is paramount in the system. They're all the same problems that we're dealing with within our organisations here. We're often trying to replace paper-based systems within the enterprise with a snazzy new iPad system. It has to work offline because our network connection, even though the graphs show we have great coverage, it often drops in and out. We're not constantly connected. So they're all the same problems that we're dealing with here.
So there's an example of how technology has influenced change in Africa. And we see that here too. It's just in a different way. So in the past, we would have used the computer to use the internet. where today we'll do that wherever we are, wherever we're at, with whatever device we have. Let's take a look at some data that sort of shows that. This is from the Australian Mobile Phone Lifestyle Index. That's been running for about 5 years. This is the last 3 years of data. Voice and SMS, there's no surprises here. Almost everybody is using their phone for voice and SMS. That's what phones are for, so okay. But if we take a look at things, categories like entertainment and visiting the web and search and banking, we can see this blue bar indicates a pretty sharp increase in people using their devices for those purposes in 2011 when compared to previous years. People are clearly using their phone for more things, and they're expecting to do that more and more. So we can think of this in terms of just-in-time information, which is more or less people using their phone to access the information they need when they need it. An example might be that in the past, if you wanted to meet your friend in the city, you'd probably call ahead on a landline and arrange to meet. In Melbourne, it would be under the clocks at Flinders Street Station, not sure on the landmark here in Sydney. And you'd arrive on time, and if your friend wasn't there, perhaps you'd wait for a little while, or eventually you might seek out a payphone and call their home to see what time they left home. And for transit information, maybe you carried a printed timetable. That was too much for me, so I tried to memorise the sequence. Something like 3 trains an hour every 20 minutes, departing 5 minutes past the hour. We see the same sort of trend in Australia. People are expecting to use their phones to make payments. How do we help them make this easier? With banking, there's a lot of moving parts. We have the banks, we've got the point of sale infrastructure, there's the hardware and operating platforms and the mobile carriers that most solutions rely on to provide some kind of mobile payment solution. A little bit closer to home, so we see here some examples. We've got on the right there Google Wallet and their partners, and on the left this is ISIS, who have it's essentially a collection of telecommunications carriers and financial services that have created a partnership so people can use them to provide a mobile payment solution. A little bit closer to home though, we can talk about Kaching. I know there's some folks here from Commonwealth Bank this morning. A little while ago they released Kaching for the iPhone using the iCart case to provide a contactless payment solution, and that's been wildly successful, really. The last numbers I read were 365,000 downloads and around about $1 billion in value transactions that have happened over Kaching since it launched. And more recently an Android version, which doesn't quite have the NFC capability of the iPhone version, but instead uses payments to a mobile number or email address. So I guess kind of similar to ANZ's Go Money in that way. And they've also been first to market with social payments with Facebook, which I think is pretty exciting. As I understand it, first to market in the world. So that's quite interesting. We also see lots of trials. ANZ have recently trialled an M-Wallet solution with Visa PayWave, so they've taken a different angle, and that was via microSD, and they've made a decision not to pursue that. There have been many other trials that we could talk about, but we want to get to the juicy details, so let's race through that. PayPal is, I guess, the original e-wallet. Let's not labour on this. I think people are pretty familiar with these kinds of solutions that are more prominent in other markets. I think we're all waiting with bated breath to see what happens with Apple. Most people will be familiar that Apple rolled out a mobile payment solution in their own stores, which basically means you can go to an Apple store and buy a low-value product, wave your phone and walk out without going to the register. For Apple to roll that out further beyond their own network of stores, inevitably they would need to partner up with banks and telcos and so on, like the other providers. But iPhone 5 is imminent. It's imminent release. It will be out very shortly, and I think most people are expecting that there'll be some kind of contactless payment solution integrated with that device with an M-Wallet. We don't really know what that's going to look like, but I think we can all assume that it's going to be big. So it'll be interesting to see how the mobile payment space changes when and if that happens.
But really, we don't need to be waiting for this snazzy technology. There's actually plenty of things we can be doing now. We've seen that with Kaching and Go Money, and we're seeing that with systems all around the world. So an example is an app called M-Pesa, which is by far the most successful payments app in the world. I'm sure some of you have read about it. It's a way of transferring money via SMS, and it's used in Kenya. Really simple technology using the existing systems that are out there. And it made about $200 million profit last year. So to put it in perspective, that's more than double what Angry Birds made, which is kind of the benchmark for how successful you are as an app. And Angry Birds is actually the next most successful app. So it is by far and away the most successful, making the most money out of any app in the world. And it runs on SMS. So I think we shouldn't shy away from the fact that existing technologies are still very much worth investing in. And the really crazy number is that not only did it make that much profit, if you actually look at how much money was transferred using M-Pesa, it was about 20 to 25% of the GDP of Kenya. That's a crazy number in my mind. That really is change happening in the way people behave. So if we look a little bit closer to home, we're seeing the same kind of thing with retail. I'm sure you've all done this, I've done this. You go into a store, you see the product, and you actually look up the comparison there. So another example in that space is a company called GS1 down in Melbourne who is building a barcode scanning app that enables people to look up ingredient information and particularly to map it to allergies, to make sure that people don't buy food that they're allergic to. So it's not just getting a cheaper price, it's actually trying to do something good with it as well. And the really great thing is because of the accessibility capability of these modern smartphones, it's actually enabling people that are vision impaired to go into a store, go shopping independently and make sure that they're not buying the things that they're allergic to. So that's really opening new markets and new sectors of the community that previously couldn't access these things, or if they did, they were buying an $8,000 big clunky device that they had to carry around with them. Now they can just carry around one of these little smartphones. So technology's changed. It's changing really fast, faster than it ever has before. Almost faster than we can keep up. We're having to adjust constantly. And the even harder thing is that our behaviour is changing as well. So it's not just meeting the new technology, it's actually looking at the new interactions that are happening. So we're going to go on to talk a little bit about well, how do we use that? How do we actually create better mobile experiences? And then going on to actually building mobile apps and strategies for cost-effective ways of building mobile apps. So if we have a look at what does success look like in the mobile space? If we went back to 2007 when these smartphones were really just getting going, it was probably a dedicated mobile website. If you had an M site that had a cut-down version of your functionality, it had your contact information and the basic things there, that was actually pretty good. People forget that when the iPhone first came out, it didn't have an app store. The way you built apps for the original iPhone was actually to build web apps in the browser. So 2007, a mobile website, you're doing pretty well. Once the app stores really got going and Android was out there as well, probably around 2010, it was all about having a shiny native app in the store. Being in the app store, it didn't so much matter that they could do everything on the app, but it mattered that you were there and that your brand was out there and that discoverability. I feel like we're actually past that now. I feel like it's not about having a cut-down version of your functionality in a little app. It's actually, people may only use your service via mobile devices. So you actually need to be providing more. And I think right now, what people are expecting is an integrated mobile experience. It's not just accessing it through a phone, it's through the phone, through a tablet. They might call you up. They might actually visit your store in person. And so we're actually having to structure our back-end systems and our apps and our mobile experience so we get that integrated, continuous experience. And it's changing so fast. In a few years' time, who knows what it's going to be. It's probably not going to be having an app in the App Store. It's going to be something different. So we need to be looking at how do we meet today's market and also be preparing for tomorrow.
Let's think just for a moment about what a post-mobile world might look like. So soon we won't need a phone to be mobile. Mobile will just be part of everything, integrated with life, integrated with everything. But we need to not forget that internet on phones is still pretty new, and there's still quite a few things we're working out. We see that when we look back at other technologies in their early days too. So radio in its early days, which was essentially stage play recitals, and it took a while for that to mature into news broadcasting and other uses like advertising. Television was the same. It was essentially radio with pictures, people like Walter Cronkite. Even the web went through this. This is Microsoft in 1995. And what we've got here is essentially brochureware. It's digitized brochures that are made available for people to interact with this amazing image map at the top. It took a while for the web to move to where it is today. So for mobile, how do we make meaning of all of this, and how do we create better mobile products? I think for a long time, we've been saying things like do less, truncate your feature set and content for mobile. And we can do this with graceful degradation. A lot of people will be familiar with this. This is a technique that's been around for a while. So in graceful degradation, essentially what we do is we start on a large screen and we scale things down to a smaller screen. The way we do that is basically to chop bits off. So in this example, we're talking about unicorns, and eventually we get down to the small screen and there's no torso and there's no tail and there's no feet. You've just got the head. And it's not that graceful either most of the time, even though it's called graceful degradation. So here's an example from banking of what this technique can mean. You can see on the left we've got the full version, and you can see we've got the full set of content and the full set of features. The mobile version, not so much. We're missing things like interest rates, maybe product disclosure statements. And in terms of features, you can do some stuff, but you can't do everything. And that's a problem for some people that want to use their mobile phone to do more. Usually it's things like product disclosure statements, and those things are hard to get right on the mobile. Maybe it's a PDF and so on. So it's easy to understand how this can happen. It's a problem because today we've got about 40% doing their daily tasks on a mobile phone, and that's going to increase. This projection says that by sometime 2013, more than 50% will be using their mobile phone for activities that were previously they were doing on the desktop. So what's a better way? Progressive enhancement is one approach. It's basically graceful degradation in reverse. So you start on the small screen, and you modify things as the screens get larger. When people talk about responsive web design or mobile first, these are essentially parts of this approach to designing mobile products. And it's a good start. It works in most cases, but it's not perfect. BagCheck, for those that aren't familiar with this, it's basically, I guess it's kind of like a fun website that helps people keep track of their favorite gear that they might like to use for their hobby. So maybe it's photography, maybe it's skydiving, whatever it might be. BagCheck was built mobile first. The large screen version came later, and you can see in this analysis, we've got a high-level analysis that we've got the full set of content and the full set of features across both mobile and full version. It's not a big surprise because a fellow called Luke Wroblewski literally wrote the book on mobile first. BagCheck was his proof of concept, so you can see that it's been successful in that way. These kinds of approaches are becoming fairly common, and in the example that we've been using, unicorns, it's helpful for delivering unicorns consistently across whatever screen you're trying to deliver those to. But it still misses something. When we think about responsive design or adaptation, it usually only deals with the interface, not the content itself. So if we've worked out how to deliver unicorns accurately to all screens, that's great, but if the customer can't interact with that in the way that they want to, then you've only gone part of the way. So another example from banking might be something like future dated payments, where if you presented a set of payments that are set to occur in the future, but a customer can't modify those, then that's not useful for them on mobile. Or likewise, an interactive PDF form for something like a home loan. You may be presenting that PDF form to a mobile, but if they can't fill it out and print it, then they're not able to use that feature in a way that makes sense for them. And it's not worked because the content hasn't been structured and presented in a way that is useful for the mobile customer. So we can think about things like responsive content. So we want to work out how to provide different versions of content and features, and versions that are appropriate for the devices that are being used to view that content. Things like create once and publish everywhere are difficult to achieve. We need to think about things like whether our content and marketing teams are ready to write content like this, and whether the content management system is capable of structuring content and delivering content in this way across a wide range of screens. Not necessarily an easy thing to do. Well, let's have a look at a quick example from Epicurious, which is a recipe website in the United States. In this example, the content object is the recipe itself and all of its various parts. For their online site, it's all about browsing, discovering recipes and deciding what you'd like to cook. Where the mobile version, they've adapted this content with an interactive ingredients list, which helps you not forget things in the supermarket, which is helpful, useful for that device. And on the tablet, they've adapted the content again to provide step-by-step cooking instructions that can be used in the kitchen. So now we've got multiple devices all operating on the same content object. So we need to start thinking about things like seamless experiences. How are we going to connect all of this content across these different devices in a way that makes sense for customers? Because one misconception about customers is that they see your channels. You might have channels set up like online and mobile and voice and in-store and so on. Customers don't have an awareness of those channels. All they see is your brand, and they have needs that they'd like to have met. Their expectation is to be able to do that across any of your channels in a way that makes sense for them. Maybe it looks something like this. We've got multiple screens, one user, and it's all connected together in some kind of way. The goal here is to provide pathways through content, seamless connections through appropriate and relevant versions of content. With an example, recently I travelled to London. Airbnb, for those that aren't familiar, is a site that essentially connects travellers with people that are renting their accommodation. I signed up for Airbnb using Facebook Open Authentication on a laptop and booked a whole bunch of accommodation. Once I hit the road, I tried to log in using the app on my iPhone. But I couldn't log in because Facebook Open Authentication didn't work properly on that device. I couldn't log in with my email, and forgotten password didn't work either because I'd signed up with Facebook Open Authentication. So you can imagine how much of a problem this was after being in transit for 24 hours. And eventually I had to seek out an internet cafe and log in to their website to try and get in touch with my host, which is a bit of a fail for a site whose core goal is to connect travellers with hosts. Not everybody gets it wrong though. I think it's important to remember that. So we've got realestate.com.au here, and a great example of multi-screen experience that's fairly seamless. So at home, perhaps you're browsing and creating a short list of properties that you're interested in to purchase. Later on that evening, using AirPlay to broadcast the full screen image gallery to your TV so you can discuss it with your partner and work out which properties you do and don't want to see. And then on the road on the weekend, the iPhone app, making your Saturday of open inspections a little bit less painful by having an open inspection planner that helps your day. So we're starting to see some interesting interaction patterns emerge around multi-screen. There's a few here. We're not going to discuss all of these, but we will discuss a few. And device shifting. Device shifting is essentially where you begin a task on one device and complete it on another. That's not really too much more to it than that. And Airbnb is an example of device shifting gone wrong. I started on one device, a laptop, and I couldn't complete it on an iPhone, so it didn't work. Other examples might be things like drafting an email on your mobile phone and then finishing it later on when you get to the office on your computer. Or filling a shopping cart on eBay and completing the purchase at home where you're more comfortable with giving your credit card information and so on. Other patterns like simultaneity. Jump-in's an app that ThoughtWorks worked on recently with 9MSN that uses this pattern of simultaneity. Jump-in is essentially a second screen experience that was designed around the Olympics. So it's an iPad app that you can use while you're in front of the TV. The idea was that it gives you access to information that is relevant to the TV broadcast that's happening. So in the case for the Olympics, it's things like live news, event schedule, real-time Twitter, that type of thing. And that information happens simultaneously and it's relevant to the broadcast. So it's an example of this pattern that we call simultaneity. Okay, so now we've got essentially an ecosystem of screens and physical interfaces that people interact with your brand. So we've mentioned a few of these before: in-store, voice, online, apps, tablet. Apps are today's heroes, really. That's probably why most of you are here. It's why we've called it a big part of our talk is about how to create better apps. So let's talk a little bit more about that.
Okay, so Jonny's presented that situation where you have different devices all working sort of cohesively together. Apple draws these diagrams where it all connects on the back end. We'll just connect it up on the back end. You often hear that said. And Apple's iCloud claims to do this. Does anyone use iCloud here? So the biggest company in the world can't get this right. iCloud constantly goes wrong for me. So having these multiple experiences, different devices that interact in different ways, all syncing up seamlessly, is actually really hard to do. And that's why we think that mobile, it's more than just an app. There's all that heavy lifting to do to get that seamless experience and get them all working together. Because you've got these devices up the top. What if someone calls into the call center? Or maybe they even, at the retail channel, maybe they actually come and visit your store in person. People still come into the stores in person. It's pretty shocking, but it happens. And then they all talk to each other. You've got this legacy thing. I think every company has this legacy thing that grew over time. No one really knows how it works anymore. The people who wrote it aren't around. It seems to work, but it's got no tests around it, and no one really knows, so you just don't touch it. But to get that seamless experience, we're actually going to have to connect up all those boxes and get them working seamlessly. We're actually going to have to open that box that no one wants to open. And there's a whole bunch of other systems in there. There's that big expensive proprietary system that someone sold you as well. And we like to draw these diagrams where you have these nice little boxes and they're connected up and they all talk to each other. Every time there's a new system, you kind of patch that on. And suddenly we realize that the app is just the tip of the iceberg. This is an analogy that we really like, that the app is the bit you see. It's really important, but there's a whole lot else going on as well. And when we draw these nice boxes with lines connecting them, it probably looks a little bit more like this. They're not cleanly separated. They're not necessarily nice things to deal with. But the app is that bit above the water, the bit that the customer sees, the bit that they'll judge you on. And it's really important to get that right. And it's something that's really booming at the moment. And getting your apps right and getting your mobile apps right might buy you a little bit of time to deal with that bit below the water as well. So we are going to talk a little bit about building mobile apps. So for those of you that thought the whole talk was going to be about building apps, we're going to talk about some technology here. For the people that thought it wasn't going to be about any technology, I'm sorry. So the first question that comes in when you make that decision that, yes, I want to build mobile apps, I want to get my product out there, get it in front of people's faces, there's a whole bunch of different mobile platforms. Which ones do we want to target? So the iPhone and Android are really dominant in Australia, especially when you're talking about the app stores. I think Windows looks really great. It hasn't got market share yet, but I think it's actually really promising. It's a really different take on that mobile interaction. And BlackBerry is about to have what seems like a last stab and with BlackBerry 10, and we'll wait and see what happens there. And I'm including the web as kind of the last channel here. It is common, almost common across all of those devices. All these mobile platforms have pretty capable web browsers. So I'm including the web as kind of a fifth platform that you can target there. And realistically, in Australia at the moment, we're mainly talking about the iPhone, Android, and the web as the three dominant platforms. So the next question that comes up is native or web. I think every company is having this debate. It's one of these great developer debates that you have. It's kind of Emacs versus Vim. It's happening at the moment. So I just want to give a little bit of background on the difference between the two and some of the trade-offs of why you might go for one or the other. And we'll talk about some strategies for how you might actually achieve that and how you build those. So native apps means you're in the App Store, which is really important for discoverability still. There's actually a reasonable proportion of people out there that can't differentiate between searching the App Store and doing a Google search in the browser. They're our customers. That's what we have to target. Being in the App Store might be really important for discoverability if there's people out there that won't find your brand otherwise. It does mean for the dominant platforms at the moment, you're programming in Objective-C and Java. I don't know if anyone's tried to program in Objective-C. It's kind of a quirky language. Even as a developer, it's kind of quirky. I love it, but most people don't. And Java's not exactly the new hotness these days either. So you don't get to use all the snazzy new technologies. But the main thing is, it's got the lowest barrier to a great experience. Building a native app doesn't make it awesome. There's plenty of rubbish native apps out there. But you have the least in your way. You're using the tools that are provided by the vendors of these platforms. So you're going to have the least in your way to get that great experience. So if we compare that with the web apps running in the browser, we can actually distribute that as a URL through the browser. And again, for discoverability, that might be great because if people can't necessarily differentiate where they're searching, they might find your brand anyway. And certainly pushing out updates and things like that is much easier if it's running on the server and running through the browser. So depending on how people interact with your brand, that might actually be a plus for building a web app. You get to use your old friends, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And that's important because we've got a lot of experience on how to build good apps with that. And it's also much easier to find good web developers at the moment. There's a real shortage of high-quality native app developers at the moment. So companies are much more likely to already have these skills. So that might be a real win. That might be a reason for building a web app is because we actually have the capability to do it. We don't have to ship it off to someone else. And we get some reuse across platforms. So HTML5 is going to come along and save the day, and everything will just work perfectly across all browsers. So there's a few little laughs in there. I'm sure a few people have tried that. It kind of works. That's why I say you get some reuse across platforms, but there is a lot of tweaking that goes on as well. We're still partway through that journey of getting there. And I think when we're talking about native versus web, there's actually a whole spectrum in between, and we shouldn't be talking about an either or. So I just want to briefly look at the spectrum between native and web and what people are calling these hybrid apps in between, and where some apps that probably you've used might sit on this. So right up at the web end, things like news apps are a good example. The Guardian and Democracy Now! are two different apps that ThoughtWorks has worked on in different parts of the world that are really about displaying content and pushing content out to users. And the web is a really appropriate technology for doing that. The data's constantly changing, they want the flexibility, and HTML and CSS and technologies like that have evolved for presenting content like that. And the Democracy Now! One actually uses some of the offline features. It does a lot of video and media, so it is possible to do these things without building a native app. And right at the other end, we'll probably have something like Instagram, which really takes advantage of the capabilities of the device, of the camera, and where that rich experience is really part of the reason why you use the application. It's not just about conveying information, it's actually an experience. So it'd be great to have a bit of both. It'd be great to be able to build a web app, but package it up and put it in the App Store so we get that discoverability and maybe a bit of offline access and things like that. So we can use technologies like PhoneGap, and I use the BBC Olympics example that was out recently because I think it's a good example of where technologies like PhoneGap are really appropriate. So unfortunately, you had to be in the UK or have a UK iTunes account to download this because of media rights, which is kind of frustrating. But they wanted to put an app out for the Olympics. There's no version 2, version 3, version 4. There was a specific time they needed to hit, and they wanted to hit as many people as possible. And they were really presenting content that was well suited to web technologies. So using something like PhoneGap is really appropriate. The screenshots of it look great. When you actually used it, it had that clunkiness you sometimes see when you've bundled up a web app inside a native app. But it was well suited to what they were trying to achieve. It was a good business decision. And then a lot of people are building what I would call custom hybrid apps, where they're using web technology within native applications. All of the mobile platforms now have pretty good support for using web technology within native applications. So LinkedIn and Facebook have published a lot about this, and their Jump In app that 9MSN put out before the Olympics also uses a significant amount of web technology within a native application. It's a good example of where that can be appropriate. And the big talking point in the last week has been the new Facebook app making a shift down there. And there's a whole lot of Apple fanboys out there saying, this is victory for native, the web technologies is dead. But if you actually read what Facebook was talking about, it's actually part of their strategy. They wanted to hit as many people as possible, get it out there on every platform, and then optimize what needed to be optimized. So it was a pretty clunky app previously, but it wasn't necessarily just because they were using web technology. If you loaded up the newsfeed app, the newsfeed on the Facebook app until a week ago, it made about 37 web requests and downloaded 0.5 MB of data. So that's not a problem with web technology, that's a problem with how you write your app in general. So I think there's an interesting debate around how Facebook is approaching their apps, and they're definitely taking the approach of using more native technology now on the iPhone for performance. But it's not an either or still. They're still using significant amount of web technology in their apps. They highlighted that where things need to change frequently and they want flexibility, they're still using web technology. And where they really want to optimize for performance, they do it natively. And hopefully they don't have too many features which really need to be optimized and need to change frequently, because that's going to be a kind of hard problem to solve. So we want to look at where should we fit on that spectrum? What approach should we be taking to building our applications? Because while it's just the tip of the iceberg, it is a significant cost at the moment, and supporting all these different platforms does take quite a lot of effort. So there's a number of factors that we should be taking into account, whether it's time to market, our existing development capability, but I want to narrow it down to what I think are the major two trade-offs between the approaches, which is optimizing for user experience or optimizing for platform coverage. So we'd all love to be up there. We'd all love to have a great user experience across all platforms. Not many people are there yet. In fact, most people are down here. We don't really have a great user experience, and we're not really on many platforms either. But that's the goal. We'd love to have a great user experience across all platforms, and we don't want to end up with a maintenance nightmare either. So one approach we could take is what we're calling the laser approach, a really fine focus on the highest priority systems and prioritizing user experience over platform coverage. So new companies often take this approach. Instagram was one, Path is another. So they actually want to use the user experience to help win new customers, and they don't have an existing customer base, so they're not annoying anyone by not putting out an app across all the different platforms. And it's actually a great way to actually win new customers using that user experience. And it's also worth looking at the market. In the Australian market, not all platforms are equal. It may not be worth putting out an app on every platform. So if your company is targeting professional adults in Australia, the usage of iPhone is vastly dominant. Still, even though the device sales are fairly similar, the iPhone is hugely dominant. If you're building say a high-end fashion website, you're already selecting the subset of the community that is also buying iPhones. So that may be worth targeting. But if you're targeting a system that targets teenagers, you're going to see a lot higher Android usage or very old iPhones. And so you're going to have a different use case there. But a lot of us want to take this cover your bases approach. We want to get out across as many platforms as possible and then slowly optimize the user experience over time. So if you've got an existing system, you've got a customer base already out there, then this is really appealing because you don't want to annoy half of your customers by putting out an app on one platform and not on others. And this is a real challenge to do this and still have that quality user experience over time. But I think when we're talking about native or web, we really should be talking about native and web. We really should be using both where appropriate, using native technology where we actually need that low-level optimization and using web technology for the things that it's suitable for. And the main thing that we've been finding as we've worked with clients using these technologies is that we don't want to necessarily lock ourselves into doing everything natively or everything using the web. So some of the frameworks out there that will help you do this can lock you in one end or the other. There are cases where it's appropriate, like the BBC Olympics example. If mobile is becoming a core channel of your business, you don't necessarily want to lock yourself into using one technology or another for all time. There was a great tweet last week from a guy that runs a mobile magazine in the UK saying, write once, run everywhere, admit mistake and try again. Because it really is hard to get that write once, run anywhere system working. So we've been trying to work at a system that tries to get the best of both camps. So sharing between platforms, which in this case we're giving the example of shared logic in JavaScript and shared presentation using HTML and CSS. And this came out of a big banking system that ThoughtWorks worked on in the United States, where over a period of time we built a native iPhone app, an iPad app, an Android app, mobile web. And every time it came to do a new platform, it was almost the same effort again. So you'd just done all this effort, put the iPhone app out there, everyone loved it, it got great reviews, and we had to do it again and again. And so that team got together at the end of the project and thought, if we had our time over, knowing what we do now about how we solved all these problems, what would we do differently? So the system they had, separate native apps, separate web apps, different technology. So I'm giving the example, you might have everything in Objective-C for an iPhone app, and for the mobile web app, using those technologies. And they thought, what could we do differently next time to get better reuse? And they thought, for this banking system, all these rules that they wrote for the web app around how the transactions worked and how all the interaction worked, when it came to do the iPhone app, they rewrote exactly the same rules in a different language. And they thought, well, you can actually run JavaScript inside these native applications. So what if we could actually reuse those rules across the different platforms and actually get a bit of benefit? So when it comes to doing a new platform, that it's not doing the entire thing again, that's actually configuring things that you've already got for a new platform and a new experience, and having the flexibility to pick and choose per feature how you would do it. They designed a little bridge that would sit in the middle of their application that would enable them to choose whether you'd write things in Objective-C or JavaScript, whether you'd use native UI or web UI, and to have the flexibility to choose which way it would go. So this Calatrava system, so Calatrava is a guy that designs bridges. He designed, that's the picture of the 4th bridge over the Grand Canal in Venice. It's a pretty tough ask if you get asked to build a bridge over the Grand Canal, I reckon. But it does pretty well, and software engineers like naming things after bridges because it makes us feel like real engineers. I'm sure you've had that question where someone, oh, you're an engineer, what type of engineering do you do? Software. Yeah, but we did name something after a bridge. And the key points around this Calatrava bridge, this is the thing that enables you to pick and choose which technologies you use and pragmatically reuse, is you get the technology choice per feature. So rather than deciding upfront for the project how you'll do it, you get to decide with flexibility the whole way through. And when I call it a framework, it's more of an approach than a framework. This whole thing is only a couple of hundred lines of code. It's more of an approach to how you can write apps on mobile. And it will be open source. I was hoping to be able to give you a URL right now and you could go and download it and play around with it. We're working on some documentation and examples at the moment that will make it easy for people to adopt this same strategy. And we think it's a really good fit. It's a great way of being able to compromise between the user experience and the platform coverage and try and get the best of both worlds. It's worth remembering that the app is just the tip of the iceberg. We have a lot of discussion around what the best way to build mobile apps is. And I've just presented one solution that ThoughtWorks has found, and we're using that in some clients now with a lot of success. But maybe we're optimizing the wrong part. I feel like there's too much debate around reuse across all the different mobile platforms and not enough debate around what all that logic is doing in your app in the first place. And maybe we can actually orchestrate the back-end systems to make our apps really simple and really small. So the best reuse you're going to get is actually going to be to do it on the back end, not do it on the app in the first place. So if you have a typical app talking to this mysterious back-end system, if that's not well suited to mobile, say you don't have an API and it takes you a year to get a new system released, so you don't bother writing an API, your mobile app just sucks down pages from the website and scrapes them inside the app. You'd be surprised how many systems actually do this. It actually adds a lot of complexity to your application. And then you start having these debates around our apps are too expensive, they're too big, we need these new strategies for reuse. But those systems, they really shouldn't be in the app at all. It should be on the back end. So we really need to focus on building good APIs that are well suited to mobile development and push that logic server side and keep our apps really small, really simple. And over time, every time we have to write a new feature in our apps and we start writing that code, we should be thinking about whether we should push it to the back end, and over time grow that API to actually take the bulk of the load and have a really small app on the end. And then the reuse factor becomes less important. It still is important to get your apps right and to get that reuse and economies of scale, but this is where the money is really going to be saved. So how do we build simpler apps and smarter backends? A few things that we've been seeing in clients in Australia and around the world that are trying to do this. Product-aligned teams make a big difference, RESTful web services, and serving data and style. By product-aligned teams, I mean not having a separate team that writes the iPhone app and the web app, and then a separate API team in a different room or a different building, different country. Because you need to be able to have those discussions around how do I push the logic server side and push the load and take it off the apps. And because once they're out there on people's phones, some people never upgrade. So it's really important that you keep control over the experience on the server side. And product-aligned teams that are actually have end-to-end responsibility through your technology stack make a big difference through that. I won't go into RESTful web services, but we've talked about them previously within ThoughtWorks. They're a new approach, structuring things like the web, linking them together. We're finding they're really well suited to mobile solutions. They give you a lot of flexibility to push the logic server side. If you're not going down that approach already, have a read, see what's suitable. You will have to pick and choose a bit. RESTful web services can tend to get very chatty, and when you're on a mobile network which drops in and out with high latency, there are some compromises you need to make, but they are very well suited. And if we're taking these hybrid approaches of using web technology and web presentation within a native app shell, we're going to have clever APIs that are not just serving raw data, but they're serving data and style information. We think between this, pushing the complexity server side and doing the heavy lifting there, and the approach we've presented with Calatrava with a little bridge to enable you to have some reuse, you can effectively build target a number of mobile platforms and get a great experience and those economies of scale across all of them.
Okay, great. So we've come to the end of the formal material. Let's take a quick look at a summary of what we see to be the most salient points. So focus on your customer behaviour before technology. We talk about the gadgets and the technology not in themselves changing the way that we behave, but the customer behaviour itself and how technology can support that behaviour. We want to find out how our customers behave first and then support them with the technology. And this just reiterates Julian's quote from Forbes. We didn't swap notes, by the way, that was total coincidence. And do more, not less for mobile. So we know that people are using their mobile phones for a lot more things. We know that just about everybody has a mobile phone, and increasingly those are smartphones. Maybe they've got tablets too. We want to, with those devices that people have and use, their expectation to do more, to do anything on mobile is increasing. And we need to find ways to support them on mobile. Truncation as a mobile strategy is dangerous.
And just to get a techie point in there, it's really important that we start to break these large monolithic systems that we only deploy once a year into smaller, faster moving components. We really do need that ability to respond to change more quickly than we can at the moment. So if it does take us that long to get new systems out there, if we can't build a new API and put it out there into production, new companies are going to come out, build new services, and they don't have that legacy, they can move quicker and they'll start to eat into our market. So if you look at what the Uber taxi app does in the United States, you can actually pull out your phone, you can see the taxis on a map around you, you can book one, you can pay for it on your phone. It's actually not a cab, it's actually a nice black town car, it makes you feel really important when it pulls up. You pay in the application, so no cash changes hands, you get in, they take you wherever you want to go. And it really is a completely new and better experience that's made possible by these mobile devices. And when these companies are asked if they can integrate with existing taxi systems so that they can have, so everyone can have this, they said, why would we want to integrate? That's just going to make us slower. We've got a great system out there, we're moving really quickly. So it's really important that we start getting ourselves into a position not just to build great mobile experiences today, but that we can move quickly and respond to change in the future. And the last point, I'm going to go through the whole talk without using the A word, but I think whatever you do, use short iterations, measure and learn quickly. There's so much uncertainty in the mobile space. Things are changing so quickly. We really don't know what the future's going to be. There's no point in making massive 2-year plans and implementing these huge ideas and then at the end turning around and saying, oh, it's completely changed. It's not relevant anymore. We really need to be looking at what's the next most important thing. Let's build that. Let's try and get feedback. Let's measure what we're doing so we can build great mobile experiences. There's significant challenges in mobile at the moment, which we've presented. It's not all doom and gloom. There's going to be a lot of new opportunities. As we see with systems like M-Pesa that are making huge amounts of money using existing technology, there's a lot of opportunity out there, but if we're not measuring, learning, and reacting quickly, we're going to miss out on them.